Okay, let's jump right into this fascinating explainer breaking down the stunning July 2026 reports from the Internationalism regarding the end of the so-called Third Gulf War. We are looking at a geopolitical shift that caught pretty much everyone by surprise, as high-stakes military tensions rapidly dissolved into some very intense diplomacy.
To really grasp how the US, Iran, and the Gulf states ended up at this totally unexpected resolution, we've got to take a step back. We need to look objectively at what was actually driving these key players. It wasn't just a sudden change of heart on the battlefield. It was this incredibly complex web of domestic pressures, economic realities, and historical parallels all colliding at exactly the same time.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the 2026 Versailles Agreement. Look at control over the strait, dive into Iran's internal political shifts, check out American strategy and retreat, explore the rise of STEP, and wrap up with the future of Gulf appeasement.
All right, let's get right into Section 1, the 2026 Versailles Agreement, the end of the Third Gulf War. Just look at the sheer speed of this diplomatic choreography. According to our source, former diplomat Michel Duclos, this insanely rapid timeline was essentially a face-saving surprise organized by the French presidency. By using the super symbolic backdrop of Versailles at the G7 summit, French President Emmanuel Macron basically offered Donald Trump an honorable surrender, right alongside Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian.
Now, the choice of location, that carries some serious historical baggage. Diplomatic commentators point out that while this 2026 agreement deliberately dodges those crushing winner-takes-all victories we historically associate with the Hall of Mirrors, think Bismarck's Germany in 1871 or the Entente in 1919, it might still go down in history giving off those same vibes of an incredibly fragile peace. Basically, it was less of a massive triumph and, really, more of a highly organized off-ramp.
Moving on to Section 2, control over the strait, Hormuz, and international trade. Okay, this brings us to the absolute critical choke point of global trade, the Strait of Hormuz. The Financial Times actually reported that Iran proposed managing the strait by collecting service fees instead of tolls. It's a really clever semantic shift. This assertion of sovereignty helps Iran keep an eye on military transit while also keeping its domestic ultra-conservative factions happy. Honestly, it's a direct echo of the 1936 Montreux Convention that gave Turkey control over the Bosphorus.
To paraphrase Shakespeare a bit here, the source highlights that this semantic shift from toll to service fee is a highly calculated diplomatic strategy. It allows Tehran to make what look like pretty modest demands on paper, especially when you compare it to a previous U.S. proposal to police the Gulf for a whopping 20% cut of regional revenues. Words literally matter in diplomacy, and this specific wording gave everybody a convenient way to just say yes.
Let's pivot to Section 3, Iran's internal political shifts, consolidating power post-conflict.
So let's look at the factions at play here. Analysts over at the Middle East Institute point out that pragmatists, like Parliament Speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf, have skillfully steered their internal consensus right toward negotiation. They basically set themselves up as wartime leaders, but managed to totally outmaneuver the ultra-conservatives, known as the worried ones, who were actively fighting the deal and even trying to organize domestic protests. To really put this political shift into perspective for you, 30. That is the incredibly small number of votes, out of 290, that the ultra-conservative opposition actually managed to scrape together against Ghalibaf's re-election as speaker. I mean, that vividly highlights just how decisively the pragmatist faction consolidated their power to push this negotiated solution across the finish line.
But you might be wondering, why push for a deal at all? Well, central bank officials and President Pezeshkian himself acknowledge a pretty harsh reality. Despite their political and military resilience, Iran's actual power relies 100% on stabilizing its domestic economy. The structural reforms they absolutely need to survive, they simply aren't possible under the crushing weight of an active conflict. It's just not going to happen.
Which brings us to Section 4, American Strategy and Retreat, Trump's Calculated Appeasement.
Now, looking at the U.S. side, the source cites geopolitical analyst Walter Russell Mead, who actually compares Donald Trump's approach here to P.T. Barnum, rather than, say, Otto von Bismarck. The argument they present is that while Trump is undoubtedly a master of political theater and spectacle, his cynical approach often vastly underestimates the resilience and nationalism of his opponents. So it kind of falls short of the concrete long-term strategic results a statesman like Bismarck would lock down.
So why take the deal then? According to the Wall Street Journal, while the agreement did successfully halt uranium enrichment and left key nuclear infrastructure in ruins, It's widely viewed as a strategic retreat. The analysis points straight to domestic pressures. We're talking the need to keep petrol prices low right ahead of midterm elections, minimizing further military risk, and dodging what they dubbed the Herbert Hoover risk, which is triggering a massive global economic recession.
And honestly, this abrupt American appeasement isn't entirely unprecedented. It follows a very clear historical pattern of Kissingerian realism. Henry Kissinger once noted that the U.S. has this habit of abandoning wars midstream when the domestic or strategic calculus shifts. It's an almost direct echo of past exits from Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, the rise of STEP, a new regional middle power alliance. Enter STEP. Originally starting out as an Islamic quartet, this consolidated middle power military and political alliance is made up of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan. According to regional leaders and foreign ministers cited in our source, STEP is now positioning itself as a massive, powerful vehicle that could actually negotiate broad regional normalization with both Tehran and Tel Aviv.
The French paper Le Figaro characterizes this brand new regional balance of power as a 6+3+1 format. Think about it like a giant puzzle. You've got the 6 oil monarchies, the 3-step middle powers, Egypt, Turkey, and Pakistan, and finally 1 Iran. What we're witnessing here is a coalition of middle powers stepping up and taking active responsibility for their own regional security architecture rather than just relying on Western intervention like we've seen in the past.
But of course, security requires capital, right? The source notes that the U.S. is reportedly counting on Doha and Abu Dhabi to set up a massive $300 billion private investment fund. That staggering sum basically acts as a giant economic carrot to ensure Iran's compliance on the nuclear issue. It's essentially asking the Arab allies to heavily finance the region's newfound stability.
Finally, let's look at Section 6, Future of Gulf Appeasement, Economic Interdependence versus Military Deterrence.
What we're ultimately witnessing is a bold attempt to replace military tension with really deep regional economic interdependence. See, appeasement here isn't just some Western concept. It's a recognized variant of balance of power politics. It's referred to as Tadiyya in Arabic and Mamasahat in Persian. Quiet diplomacy, led by states like Qatar, is basically trying to weave these economies together so tightly that future conflict becomes, well, financially unthinkable.
As we wrap up this explainer, you can literally feel the international relief surrounding the Versailles Agreement. But it leaves us with one seriously provocative question presented by the source material. Will this vast economic appeasement truly secure a lasting peace by fixing those deep geopolitical fault lines? Or is this all just a temporary pause until the next turn of the region's wheel of fire? That is the billion-dollar question every global strategist is trying to figure out right now.